King Charles paused his cancer treatment this summer. Not stopped, paused. That is the word the palace used, and in palace communications, the word choice is almost never accidental because every statement goes through layers of approval and consideration before it reaches a journalist's inbox. A pause is not a conclusion, and the palace wanted you to know it was not a conclusion. But a pause in cancer treatment at 76 years old, after a diagnosis that has been managed and discussed and carefully communicated for well over a year, means the body has reached a point where treatment itself needs to rest. That is a specific kind of medical reality, and the palace communicated it without saying it in those terms, in the careful institutional language that has been refined across decades of navigating exactly these situations, telling you something significant while technically only telling you about a schedule change.
And Meghan Markle are going to have no role when Prince William becomes king, and he's already planning this.
The thing about institutional language in moments like this one is that the people who follow the institution most closely, and who have followed it for long enough that they have a calibrated understanding of how it talks about different kinds of situations, learn to read what is not said as much as what is said, sometimes considerably more. A pause in treatment is information. The timing of when it is disclosed is information. The specific framing chosen, pause rather than break, rather than adjustment, rather than any of the other words that would have landed slightly differently, is information. And the people who cover this family for a living were reading all of it simultaneously with the announcement. The trooping the color footage gave them something more immediate to work with. Charles arrived on horseback, which was the single image that the people monitoring his situation most closely had been waiting for, because riding requires a kind of physical capability and core stability that the images from earlier appearances in the year had raised quiet questions about. He was upright. He was present in the way that the king needs to be present at the ceremony that most visibly announces the vitality of the monarchy to the watching world.
It will be active. It won't just be, I'm ignoring this. It will be, your titles are stripped. You are gone. You are banished. He doesn't even want Harry at his coronation.
He did what needed to be done. For a day, in the sunlight, with the guards and the horses and the crowd, he looked like someone who had found a reserve to draw on. But there were moments in the footage, the kind that broadcast cameras catch between the formal sequences, in the transitions and the margins of the ceremony, rather than in its carefully composed center, where he looked like a man who was very carefully managing what was available to him rather than operating with the ease of a man who is well, not performing wellness, exactly. The distinction matters, and he has always been too honest in his body language for pure performance, but marshalling what was available in a way that told you what was available has changed from what it was 2 or 3 years ago. The people who know what this family looks like when it is well, because they have been covering it for decades, registered that difference. Most of them have not said so directly in their writing, but they have said it in the way they are framing the stories around everything else connected to Charles this summer, which is with a kind of quiet deliberateness that signals they are thinking about more than the immediate news cycle.
Will strip Prince Andrew along with all other non-working royals of their HRHs and princely titles when he ascends to the throne. Meghan and Harry will see their dukedoms and HRHs formally revoked, according to the Daily Beast, by Prince William.
Stay with me, because the Charles health story connects to a series of other things happening right now in ways that I think the individual stories miss when they are covered separately. If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture when other channels are giving you the headline version, the like button keeps this channel going and it genuinely costs you nothing. There is a letter, or rather, there are reports of a letter. And in this family, reports of private correspondence tend to be as significant as the letters themselves, because what gets communicated through back channels and what gets communicated formally are often doing two entirely different jobs simultaneously. Catherine reportedly wrote to Harry around the time of the Birmingham visit. The content has not been publicly confirmed, and the palace has not addressed it directly, but the fact of the letter has been described by multiple separate sources in a way that makes it harder to dismiss as speculation, and what those sources suggest about its tone is that it was warm, not a formal reconciliation, not anything that changes official positions or restores previous arrangements, but something that communicated a degree of personal openness that has been visibly absent from Catherine's posture toward Harry for several years now.
But they are insisting on using titles from the British royal family. And when you do that, whether you like it or not, you are representing the monarchy, and there are some rules that
Catherine writing to Harry is significant in a way that goes beyond the letter itself because of who Catherine has been throughout the entire Sussex period. She has been the family member most consistently associated with holding a firm position. She has not softened publicly, has not participated in the back-channel optimism signals that have suggested Charles remains personally open to Harry in ways that William does not. She has conducted herself throughout the entire Sussex period with the kind of disciplined consistency that is simultaneously the thing that has made her most trusted within the institution and the thing that made her a sustained target of criticism from the Sussex camp in the early years. Two sides of the same quality, valued differently depending on which side of the situation you are standing on. If the reports of a letter are accurate, and if the tone was what sources suggest it was, then something in her position has shifted, or at least, the beginning of a shift is visible. And a shift in Catherine's position within this family matters institutionally in a way that goes beyond the personal, because she has been one of the people whose stance has made the firmness of William's position sustainable. The palace has not confirmed the letter. The Sussex operation has not commented, which places it precisely where so much of this family's interior life sits, in the narrow space between what is known and what is confirmed, visible to the people who track this story most closely and deniable by everyone with an official capacity to deny things. Now let's talk about the Birmingham visit more specifically, because I think the way it is being covered as primarily a sports event is missing the most important dimension of what actually happened there. Harry arrived in Birmingham for the Invictus Games without Meghan, without the children, and without the full level of safety provision that he has said publicly is a requirement for him to bring his family to the UK. He went anyway. I want to dwell on that for a moment, because it is easy to process as a logistical fact and move past it, but I think it is actually one of the more revealing things Harry has done in a long time. He has been consistent about the security position for years. He took it to court. He used it as the primary public explanation for why the family was not visiting. It was the stated reason, the reason that the Sussex communications operation went to the press with, the reason that generated genuine public sympathy from some people and genuine exasperation from others. And then he got on a plane to Birmingham without it, which means either the position was never as absolute as it was presented in all those years of court filings and press briefings, or something about this specific moment made Birmingham important enough to come to regardless. Both of those readings are significant, and I am not certain which one is right, but neither of them makes the previous years of security positioning look straightforwardly genuine. The fact that he came alone also changes the dynamic in a way that I think is genuinely underreported. Every previous significant Harry appearance in the UK since 2020 has been positioned as part of the Sussex unit. The two of them together, facing the institution together, the US against them visual that the Sussex operation has been built on. Harry in Birmingham alone, without Meghan, doing the Invictus thing he believes in most deeply without the apparatus around it. That is a different picture. It is a picture of Harry the person rather than Harry the Sussex brand operation. And the meeting with his father, if it happened in the conditions being reported, happened in that specific context. A son who showed up without his whole operation around him in a space where the thing everyone was nominally focused on was veterans, which is as far from brand narrative management as Harry's current public life gets. A meeting between Harry and Charles was reported, with the detail that it lasted longer than the brief encounter earlier in the year, and that it occurred without the usual advisory presence that has characterized most of the managed interactions between them in this period. I want to be careful about this because the reporting is thin and the specifics are not confirmed, but the reporting exists from multiple directions, and the sources describing it as a meaningful meeting rather than a brief protocol exchange are consistent with each other in ways that are harder to dismiss than a single account would be. What a meeting without advisors means in this context is specific. When the people whose job is to protect institutional positions and manage future narratives are not in the room, the two people who are left have a conversation that is not filtered through the awareness of how it will be managed afterward. That is the only kind of conversation that can actually move anything between these two people, because every other kind comes with too much calculation attached to it on both sides to allow anything genuine to surface. Whether this particular meeting achieved something genuine, something that will eventually be visible in how this family operates over the next year, or whether both sides left with their positions essentially unchanged and the meeting was simply a father and son in the same room for a while, is something that only the two people in the room know. And neither of them is saying. Dickie Arbiter, who spent years as press secretary to Queen Elizabeth II and who understands this institution at a level that most outside commentators do not, because he was inside it, in the room for the decisions, watching how it actually functions rather than how it presents itself, has been watching the health situation and the Birmingham visit together and drawing a conclusion that I think is worth taking seriously. His read is that Charles is moving into a phase of his illness where the personal calculation about Harry changes. Not because Harry has done anything to earn a change, and not because William's position has softened in any visible way, but because a man managing his health at this level, and with this prognosis, tends to evaluate time differently than he did a year ago. Different priorities surface. The things that felt like they could be managed over the long term start to feel less long term than they did. Arbiter is not suggesting anything as dramatic as a full reunion or a restoration of Harry to working royal duties. He is making the more specific observation that urgency changes what a father is willing to do, and that the urgency in Charles's situation is genuinely different now than it was 18 months ago. The royal historians who have been tracking this story across the longer arc have noted something that I think belongs directly in this conversation. There is a historical pattern in how the British monarchy handles estrangements within the royal family during the later years of a sovereign's reign. It is not a consistent pattern. Some situations have resolved during this period, and others have not, and the outcome depends on factors that are specific to each family and each situation, rather than on any general rule. What the historians observe is that the institution itself tends to exert pressure toward visible resolution when it calculates that an unresolved rift will create complications around a succession. Not emotional complications, but operational ones. The kind that affect who sits where at ceremonies, who is photographed with whom, what the image of the monarchy looks like in the moments that are broadcast to the entire world. William's coronation, whenever it arrives, and it is not imminent, but it is the event that the institution is in some sense always preparing for, even when the current sovereign is present and active, will be the most watched television event on the planet for the day it happens, watched simultaneously by more people than almost any broadcast in history, analyzed at a level of detail that would make most state occasions look casual by comparison. Who is in that building and who is not? Who is visibly acknowledged and who is visibly absent? What the cameras catch in the margins between the formal sequences? All of that will be observed and analyzed and written about for years afterward. The institution has a clear, practical, reputational interest in that event, looking like a family united around a crown and a continuation rather than a family fractured around an unresolved argument that the entire watching world is already familiar with. And that institutional interest is one more pressure operating on the question of where Harry eventually sits when the moment comes. That said, and this matters, the difference between the appearance of resolution and the reality of resolution is something this family has demonstrated it understands very well. Harry could be in the building, and the relationship could be unchanged in any substantive way. Shared physical space is not the same as shared understanding. A ceremony attended by both brothers is not the same as brothers who have repaired anything. The institution is skilled at producing the first of those things and considerably less skilled at producing the second, and the cameras will show you the first whether or not the second is real. Stay with me for one more minute, because there is a quality to this summer that is different from any of the previous summers in this story, and I want to try to name what it is even though it is genuinely hard to pin down precisely. It is not the meeting alone, though the meeting matters considerably given what the meetings in recent years have and have not produced. It is not the letter alone, though the letter matters because of who wrote it and what her writing it communicates about her position. It is not the treatment pause alone, though that matters most of all in terms of what it signals about the timeline this family is now operating inside, about how urgency is or is not being felt by the people making decisions. It is something in the combination of all of them, arriving close together in the same summer, suggesting that people inside the family are making different calculations than they were making before. Catherine writing a warm letter at this moment is not a coincidence with the timing of Charles's health situation. Harry traveling to Birmingham without the security conditions he said he required is not a coincidence with the same timing. These things are in conversation with each other, even when nobody is explicitly saying they are, because the people making these decisions are aware of the same context and are responding to it in their own ways. Something is in motion this summer that was not in motion a year ago. Whether it becomes something real, something that eventually shows up in how the family actually operates, in how Harry and William are in the same room at some point, in how Archie and Lilibet know their grandfather, or whether it resolves into another round of carefully managed distance dressed up as progress, is the question that nobody outside the immediate situation can currently answer. It might not even be fully answered by the people inside it yet, because it depends on choices that haven't been made. Charles is still the king. He is still present, still performing the role with the discipline of someone who has been preparing for it his entire life. But the pause in his treatment, and the texture of his appearances this summer, and the fact that the people who know him well are talking about his situation differently than they were a year ago, all of that sits alongside the Birmingham meeting and the Catherine letter and Dickie Arbiter's read of what a father with this kind of urgency does when the window is open. What feels different about this summer is something harder to quantify than a letter or a meeting or a treatment pause. And I want to try to name it because I think it matters, even if it resists easy description. It is a change in the texture of the coverage, in the way people who know this family are talking about what is happening and how they are framing it, in the sense that the variables are moving in ways that have not moved for a long time. Part of what I am reading is the way that the people who cover Charles specifically, the correspondents who have been on this beat for years and who know the difference between a situation that is stable and one that is shifting, are writing about him right now. There has been a shift in the last few months in how royal correspondents are framing his situation, away from the cautious optimism of earlier in the year, towards something more measured, more aware of the limitations of what the available information is actually telling us. That shift in how knowledgeable observers are framing the story is itself a form of information, because these are people who have been doing this for a long time and who calibrate their language carefully, who do not change their framing without a reason, and who are currently framing things differently. They are not saying anything directly, because the story is not one that can be said directly when all of the most important information is private and unconfirmed. But they are saying things differently than they were 6 months ago. And the difference in how they are saying things is itself a data point. Part of it is the convergence of things happening close together. Catherine writing a letter at precisely this moment, Harry traveling to Birmingham without conditions at precisely this moment, a meeting happening in the specific circumstances being reported at precisely this moment. These things are not accidents of timing. The people inside this family are aware of the same context, aware of the same facts about Charles's situation, and are making decisions in response to that shared context in ways that are producing different behavior than the same people were producing 18 months ago. That is not nothing. That is something responding to something, even when the specific something remains private. And part of it is the treatment pause itself, which I keep coming back to because I think it is the detail that frames everything else. A pause in treatment at this stage means the body is telling the doctors something, and the doctors are responding by giving the body time. That is a medical situation, and I do not want to characterize it beyond what it is, a development in a complicated long-term illness being managed by professionals. But in the context of a family with a fractured relationship and a finite window to address it, any development in that illness changes the weight of every decision around it. Charles's health situation is not the only factor in what is happening this summer, but it is the factor that is making everything else feel more urgent to the people who are responding to it than it felt before. The window that this summer creates is real. It is not infinite. No window involving a 76-year-old man managing a serious illness is infinite. But it is open right now in a way that it was not open a year ago. Every other variable in this story, Harry's position, Meghan's position, William's position, the commercial situation, the titles, the security arguments, all of those could theoretically change with time and effort and the right circumstances. The health situation operates on a completely different schedule from all of those variables, and that schedule does not wait for anyone's timeline or commercial calendar or narrative strategy to be ready. Whether Harry understands what that window requires of him in return, not as a negotiating position or a condition, but as a genuine response to a genuine opening, is the question I come back to most often. The window opening slightly, Charles making himself available without conditions, Catherine writing something warm, the institutional calculus beginning to shift, none of that does the work on its own. It creates the possibility of something being done. What actually gets done is still entirely determined by the choices the people involved make about whether to use the possibility the window creates or to let it pass while producing the appearance of engagement without the substance of it. This family has shown it can do both, and distinguishing between them from the outside is genuinely difficult. This is not a hopeful or pessimistic column in the sense of telling you that everything is going to work out or that it will not, because I genuinely do not know that, and I do not think anyone does. It is an observation that the situation is genuinely different from what it was 12 months ago, in ways that are small but real and worth paying attention to, and that the next few months will tell you more about where this family is actually heading than the last 3 years combined. What do you make of all of this? Does the convergence of the meeting and the letter and the treatment pause feel like the beginning of something meaningful? Or does the pattern of this family make you skeptical that anything real changes regardless of what happens in private? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want your honest read on this one because these questions are not straightforward, and the comment section on this channel tends to have some of the best analysis. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one.